Idaho gives landlords broad freedom to set and raise rent, consistent with the state's overall landlord-friendly regulatory approach. The governing law is found in Idaho Code Title 6, Chapter 3, and Title 55, Chapter 2. And while the framework establishes basic procedural requirements, it places no restrictions on the amount a landlord can charge for rent. If you manage rental property in Idaho, you operate in one of the most permissive environments in the country for rental pricing. Idaho does not have rent control or rent stabilization of any kind. There is no state statute that caps rent increases, limits the frequency of increases, or requires landlords to obtain government approval before raising rent. Idaho's political and regulatory philosophy strongly favors property rights, individual liberty, and minimal government intervention in private business. Idaho has enacted a preemption statute that prevents local governments from enacting rent control. Under Idaho Code Section 55-307, no city, county, or other political subdivision can enact any ordinance or resolution that would have the effect of controlling the amount of rent charged for private residential property. This means Boise, Meridian, Nampa, Idaho Falls, Pocatello, Coeur d'Alene, and every other Idaho municipality are legally barred from implementing rent caps, regardless of local political sentiment around housing affordability. This preemption is particularly significant given Idaho's rapid population growth. The Boise metropolitan area has been one of the fastest-growing markets in the country, and housing costs have increased dramatically. The affordability conversation in the Treasure Valley has been intense, and without the preemption statute, there would likely be significant political pressure for local rent regulation in Boise and surrounding communities. The preemption ensures that the market-based framework remains uniform statewide. For month-to-month tenancies, the landlord must provide advance written notice before a rent increase takes effect. Idaho requires at least one full month's written notice before changes to the terms of a monthly tenancy. So if rent is due on the 1st and you want the increase to take effect on May 1st, you need to deliver the notice before April 1st. The notice should be in writing and should clearly state the current rent, the new rent amount, and the effective date. Idaho doesn't prescribe a specific statutory form for rent increase notices, but a clear written notice delivered by a documented method, personal delivery, certified mail, or posting on the premises, is always recommended. For fixed-term leases, the rent is locked in for the duration of the lease term unless the lease includes a provision allowing midterm increases. Common midterm adjustment provisions include escalation clauses, provisions tied to property tax changes, and CPI-based formulas. Without such a provision, the landlord must wait until the lease expires to negotiate a new rent as part of a renewal or new lease. When a fixed-term lease approaches expiration, the landlord should communicate the proposed new rent well in advance. If the tenant agrees, a new lease is executed at the new rate. If the tenant doesn't agree, the lease expires at its natural end. If the tenant stays and the landlord accepts rent, the tenancy converts to a month-to-month arrangement, subject to the 1-month notice requirement for future changes. For week-to-week tenancies, the notice period for rent changes follows the one rental period rule, 7 days notice. Now let's cover the restrictions that apply even without rent control. Rent increases cannot be retaliatory. Idaho doesn't have as detailed an anti-retaliation statute as some states, but courts recognize the principle that landlords cannot use rent increases as punishment for tenants exercising their legal rights. If a tenant makes a good faith complaint about habitability, reports a code violation to a government agency, or exercises any other legal right, and the landlord responds with a dramatic rent increase, the tenant may have grounds to challenge it. The practical challenge for tenants asserting retaliation in Idaho is that without a strong statutory presumption, the burden of proving retaliatory intent falls more heavily on the tenant. The tenant must demonstrate through circumstantial evidence, timing, magnitude, the landlord's treatment of other tenants, and the absence of a legitimate business justification that the increase was motivated by the tenant's protected activity rather than by market conditions. For landlords, this means the legal risk of a retaliation claim is lower in Idaho than in states with strong statutory presumptions, but it's not zero. A rent increase that is clearly timed to punish a tenant for filing a complaint, particularly when no other tenants received comparable increases, can still result in legal consequences. Documentation and consistency remain the best protection. Rent increases also cannot be discriminatory. Under the Federal Fair Housing Act and the Idaho Human Rights Act, found in Idaho Code Title 67, Chapter 59, landlords cannot raise rent based on a tenant's race, color, religion, national origin, sex, disability, or familial status. The Idaho Human Rights Commission investigates fair housing complaints and can take enforcement action. Idaho's fair housing protections align closely with the Federal Fair Housing Act. Some Idaho cities, including Boise, have enacted local anti-discrimination ordinances that may provide broader protections, such as protections based on sexual orientation and gender identity. Landlords in these cities should verify the specific local categories that apply. From a practical standpoint, Idaho's rental market has been one of the most dynamic in the country over the past several years, and understanding the specific market conditions in your area is essential for making smart pricing decisions. Boise has been at the epicenter of Idaho's growth story. The city experienced explosive population growth driven by Californians and other West Coast migrants seeking lower taxes, more affordable housing, and a higher quality of life. Technology companies, including Micron Technology, HP, and a growing startup ecosystem, healthcare, and the state government anchor the economy. During the peak growth period, Boise saw some of the most dramatic rent increases in the nation, with some areas experiencing double-digit annual increases. However, the Boise market has also demonstrated that rapid growth can moderate. As the initial surge of migration stabilized and significant new apartment construction came online, the market has become more balanced. Landlords who pushed rents to the absolute peak during the growth surge found that some tenants migrated to more affordable communities in the Treasure Valley, Meridian, Nampa, Caldwell, and Eagle, or pushed back on renewal rates. The lesson is that even in a booming market, there's a ceiling determined by what tenants can actually afford and what competitors are charging. Meridian, now Idaho's second-largest city by population, has grown from a quiet Boise suburb into a major community in its own right. The rental market in Meridian has been strong, driven by families seeking quality schools and a suburban lifestyle. Rents are somewhat lower than central Boise, but have increased substantially. Nampa and Caldwell in the western Treasure Valley offer more affordable alternatives. These communities have attracted tenants priced out of Boise and Meridian, and rents have increased accordingly, though they remain lower than in the core Boise market. Landlords in Western Canyon County need to balance pricing against the competitive alternatives available to tenants. Idaho Falls, in eastern Idaho, has a rental market driven by the Idaho National Laboratory, healthcare, and agriculture. INL is one of the largest employers in eastern Idaho, and the lab's ongoing operations and expansion plans support consistent rental demand. Rents in Idaho Falls are moderate and have increased at a sustainable pace. Pocatello, home to Idaho State University, has a student-influenced rental market where demand follows the academic calendar. The broader Pocatello market is moderate and affordable. Twin Falls has a growing economy driven by agriculture, food processing, including Chobani's major production facility, and regional commerce. The rental market has tightened as employment has grown, and landlords have seen improved pricing power. Coeur d'Alene and the Panhandle region of northern Idaho have experienced significant growth driven by lifestyle migration. People drawn to the area's natural beauty, outdoor recreation, and small-town character. Coeur d'Alene's rental market has tightened considerably, and rents have increased dramatically. The area's proximity to Spokane, Washington adds a cross-border dynamic. Some tenants choose between the two markets based on total cost of living. Moscow, home to the University of Idaho, has a student-driven rental market. Rents near campus follow the academic calendar, and the market is competitive among student housing providers. Sun Valley and the Wood River Valley have a resort-driven market similar to what we've discussed in other mountain communities. Rents are extremely high, seasonal worker housing is scarce, and the market caters to both year-round residents and seasonal visitors. Ketchum and Haley rents are disproportionately high for communities of their size. One best practice for Idaho landlords. In the Treasure Valley's competitive market, conduct thorough market analyses before implementing increases. Use current comparable rental listings, property management reports, and local market data to ensure your pricing reflects actual conditions. The rapid growth of recent years led some landlords to overprice their units relative to the market's absorption capacity, resulting in vacancies that cost more than the theoretical revenue from higher rent. Pricing competitively within your specific submarket, considering factors like location, unit condition, amenities, and the competition from new construction, produces better long-term results than simply pushing for the highest possible rate. Another best practice: for landlords in growth markets, consider the competitive impact of new apartment construction. The Boise metro area and other Idaho communities have seen significant new multifamily development, and these new properties compete directly with existing rental stock. New construction typically offers modern amenities, efficient floor plans, and attractive common areas. If your property is older, your pricing strategy needs to account for this competitive reality. You may not be able to match the rents at new properties unless your units offer comparable quality or other advantages like location or value. For landlords in resort communities like Sun Valley and McCall, seasonal demand patterns affect pricing strategy. Year-round tenants provide stability but may require more moderate pricing, while seasonal workers accept higher rents but create turnover. Balancing these dynamics is key to maximizing revenue while maintaining occupancy. Idaho's agricultural economy influences rental markets in farming communities across the state. The dairy industry, potato farming, sugar beets, and other agricultural operations employ workers who need housing. Some agricultural communities, particularly in the Magic Valley around Twin Falls and Jerome, have seen increased demand tied to food processing facility expansions. Landlords in these areas should monitor local employment trends when planning rent increases. Idaho also has growing manufactured home communities, and landlords who own or manage these communities should be aware of any specific notice or procedural requirements that may apply to lot rent increases under Idaho law. For Idaho landlords who participate in the Housing Choice Voucher Program, rent increases must be approved by the local housing authority. The authority evaluates whether the proposed rent is reasonable by comparing it to comparable unassisted units. Submit increase requests well in advance of the desired effective date. Idaho requires landlords to return the security deposit within 21 days of the tenant vacating, or up to 30 days if specified in the lease. Idaho does not have a statutory cap on the amount of the security deposit. While these rules don't directly regulate rent increases, landlords should understand that increasing rent doesn't automatically entitle them to collect additional deposit from an existing tenant without a new agreement. For the complete guide to Idaho rent increase laws, visit tenantscreeningbackgroundcheck.com. Subscribe to our channel for every state in our landlord-tenant law series.